Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
I'm Robert.
And today we're answering the question, can Star Wars Destiny beat Magic? We are officially back in this. Now, I will say we have Robert back on the show. Welcome,
Really?
Welcome back to the Covenant Cast. And we've had a fair number of requests for your return in the
I
comments.
would say occasional.
You took. I said fair. I think that's an apt word.
Fair is more generous than occasional.
But it's been a minute. You haven't been on the show in like a couple months.
Several. 4
months
or so.
No way.
It was just after Gen Con.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's odd. I guess you're right. So before we get into updates and news and industry stuff, and then the topic at hand here for the cast, anything notable in the life of Robert?
Not really. Enjoying winter. Doing more baking than I used to, which is great.
We've had kind of a mild... It was supposed to get some snow. We didn't.
Hey, people always say that. Let me tell you, in Oklahoma, people always will talk about how mild the winter was. But we had frigid days and weeks
last year
at Bent's. No, already. We've had temperatures down into the teens. It has snowed at least once, paltry amounts. But yeah, we did.
Was that this year?
Yeah.
Huh.
And then we did have a total blizzard dodge, thing that nailed the East Coast earlier this week. Yeah.
And we just get nice weather, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, I like nice weather. The main thing I like about winter is there is no insect population.
I was going to say the bugs. Yeah. I agree.
I hate them.
Growing up,
they're like sin. They get everywhere.
They do get everywhere.
It's irritating. What do you say about it?
You know how to. What do you say?
What do you say?
It's dry. It's irritating. It gets everywhere.
It gets everywhere.
You know how to get me going. You just start inserting prequel quotes.
That's right. Some fresh mayonnaise.
So yeah, I agree. Winter's been nice. It's been a busy season.
It's the superior season, in my opinion.
Winter of all seasons.
Yes.
And then winter's different in different places. So I assume you mean cold.
Yes,
but not like
North American average continental winter.
In the middle, not like Minneapolis cold.
Correct, or lake effect regions or anything like that.
Like
I don't
cutting winds.
Yeah, I don't want to get buried in anything. Yeah.
So there's been a couple big things happening recently. First,
go on.
It's been a busy season. You handle a lot of the logistical things around these parts. We had KeyForge come out. We had a set of Destiny come out. We have a lot of products that have been coming out, including our Archon tokens that are compatible with KeyForge.
We keep going.
And the Destiny compatible character boards and the upgrade of the tokens.
New champion set.
New champion. So it was like and Thanksgiving, and that came at the tail of that. So it's just kind of been like for me a blur.
Yeah.
The past couple of months.
Yeah, November particularly, because we were doing those Black Ops.
Just
projects.
Building those sets out and getting them done. But we also recently got a couple of really big pieces of news for Destiny. So like for me, I've been trying to survive, and then on the side of that playing Destiny, and I revealed to you a few weeks back that I went like 3 or 4 weeks after a set of Destiny came out before playing a single game of Constructed. So this weekend we have the Trilogy's Masters Qualifier. It's the last qualifier that's happening before the championship, February 1st and 2nd.
Mega finale.
And if you're wanting to qualify, you'll need to do that. And actually today, this will go up on Friday, so it's tomorrow. But then beyond that, we'll be putting up spots for the championship, I presume, and you can get in, and there's a limited number of those spots. We have Jeremy coming in, who's the now lead designer, and I think he's doing a great job. But we also got some important just news for the game, which was they announced the next set, which is Convergence, set 7. It's a base set. It's the first set where rotation is going to happen, so that's a pretty big moment.
Yeah.
And the Constructed I have been playing since the 3 weeks I didn't play has been all Trilogies, which is the latest 3 sets.
Which everybody says is the best around.
It is so the best. So Convergence is going to come out, and that means the rotation is going to be the current Trilogies format plus Convergence. Those 4 sets.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I mean, I was interacting with someone on Twitter about this because I posted and I kind of like jokingly said I wanted early rotation. Like, go ahead and rotate the first 3 sets out. And they were like, oh no, like you can't do that. That's crazy. Half my cards aren't usable anymore. Which is, I get it.
But it's necessary.
Well, what I was
got to.
I clarified and he understood after I explained it, which is there are twice as many cards in Standard, which is all 6 sets.
Yeah.
But when I'm playing in Standard, I see way less cards because the best cards are just so the best that you see them in every deck that you see. And so while there's twice as many cards, the card diversity is way lower. Whereas when I play Trilogies, the decks I'm seeing, the characters I'm seeing, the cards in the deck I'm seeing are way different. So I'm very excited about the next set. Of course, when they announced a new set, we put Saga sets up. You can pre-order those. We are starting to run out of the on-release sets, the ones that'll ship at the latest by the time the game is releasing or by the set's releasing. A lot of times they'll show up on release or super close to release.
Yeah, exactly.
But we got that on Friday, and the community kind of was like, hey, wait a second, we don't have a rules reference guide update or a Balance of the Force update, which has kind of been expected for a while.
Sure.
Been a lot of big tournaments going on for the game, and there's one deck, Thrawn Snoke in particular, that's been kind of like dominant, like 7 out of 8 of the top 8 at multiple major events across, which is pretty crazy. But then on Monday, we actually got the rules reference guide. We got Balance. We streamed some Trilogies games on Monday and talked about it a little bit. But essentially, they did a couple really cool things, in my opinion. So the first thing they did is that they adjusted Snoke directly. But it seems like they keep learning. So even when we're talking about early rotation, Legacies, that cycle feels so much better in terms of like balance across all the cards than the first cycle did. And then this, as compared to like a year ago when they updated, and it was back when like the 9s meta was a ridiculous deck was going on, and Pomos. They kind of adjusted too hard back then.
Yeah.
So it went from like these cards that were really good, like maybe too good, are just like no longer playable.
Yeah.
Which sometimes you have to do. But like with Snoke, because we have the -1 plots, the Thrawn Snoke deck is still playable. You just give your opponent an extra card and 2 free damage at the start of the game.
All right.
So like it's a mild tweak.
Sure.
Not enough to make him go away, but enough to hopefully get it from 7 out of 8 to like 1 out of 8.
Yeah.
Kind of a situation. But on top of that, the more important thing for me is, and you'll be familiar with this as a Magic person in the past, there were a number of cards from the first cycle, the first trilogy, that when paired with some of the newer cards, effectively broke the game. And I won't say broken, it's not like an infinite kind of a thing.
Sure.
Like I know in some...
Disproportionately strong, at least.
Yeah,
though.
so it resulted in what are called one-turn decks.
Oof.
So one turn
Sounds
kill,
fun.
1 turn mill.
Yeah.
And there was one deck that could literally draw 20 or 30 cards and mill your opponent out on a single turn.
Ugh.
And a lot of times it was like the first turn.
What?
So, and I said, before they released this, and I basically just avoided standard because I assumed something would change.
Sure.
But what I said is that if I went to a tournament, especially if I traveled like a regional or something, my first round was against a 1-turn mill, and I just get milled in the first turn. I don't know if I ever play Destiny again.
Yeah.
As much as I love it, it's just like, that might break me.
Sure.
But they...
And rightly so.
Yeah.
Frankly.
That's not...
Yeah. That is inherently not fun.
For me, that's not fun.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the...
But, you add on everything else that goes with or into making an appearance at an event like that, and whether or not you're in town, but particularly if you're out of town, it's like, you traveled so far, or maybe you have a hotel room, and then you just show up, and there's just something janky waiting for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just not ideal. Because, again, when you start really asking the question why you're playing, which I think will be a relevant part of our whole discussion here.
Sure.
The reality is, to me, for Destiny, right, it's Star Wars characters against Star Wars characters in an epic battle. Dream teams, right? You compare Vader with Kylo, or you compare Han with Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
And like you can do whatever you want, right? And so when you get there and it's like you don't even really get to play, it's just like, your whole deck's gone and you lose. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's very disappointing. Like there's a lot of reasons I don't like Mill, but they adjusted 4 or 5 cards, and there's a couple good examples. One of the characters is Sienna Ree. So in the second cycle, they introduced power actions, actions you can take once a round. She had an action that you could use as many times as you wanted. And it was fine. It cost 2 resources to use it, but you can basically ready a vehicle.
Sure.
So if you can get enough money,
yeah,
then she could just be insane. She's really cheap. So they switched her action to a power action.
Okay.
So it's once per round.
Yeah.
And they basically used a tool they invented later, power action, and put it on an older card and kind of fix the problem. But then they addressed 3 or 4 other cards that effectively say 1-turn decks aren't going to happen. Like it just like...
Can't loop
shut
or repeat.
it down. It's like the cards that were getting them so many resources and so many cards just got changed.
Okay.
Like errated in some way to prevent it from occurring like that. So overall, I think my general take on it as a player, it actually makes me interested in Standard again, willing to play.
Sure.
Because Thrawn Snoke kind of was an answer to 1-turn mill. He could beat that deck.
Yeah.
But like if I went to a tournament and 90% of the decks are either mill or Thrawn Snoke, I'm just not interested.
Yeah, you
Like,
want some diversity there.
Yeah, I want things that do damage.
Sure.
Like in some deck, right?
Yeah,
Like
playing to the fundies of the game.
Yeah. Anyway, so some big news for Destiny. I think it was a positive. It felt like a much more mature rules reference update. They clarified, like, there's a weird thing where in the original rules, let's say you play a card that can only go on a blue character.
Sure.
But you don't have a blue character. Technically, or like a card that requires spotting a blue character, you've played the card and paid for it, so it just doesn't resolve and goes in your discard pile. There's an argument for that.
Okay.
Because there wasn't clarity on...
Sure.
Because it was basically you play a card and pay the cost,
Yeah.
and then it's like, then you start reading the text to see what it does. Obviously, that's not fun,
Yeah.
right? Like if you
Is that
pay
gonna
2
work?
for a card you think you can play and you can't, and it just means you lose 2 money and lose the card.
Sure.
No one enjoys that.
Yeah.
But like at top levels of tournaments, people are like,
Yeah.
you got to play it.
Gotcha.
And so they clarified that if you can't play a card, you literally go back 3 steps. It's like you walk it back. You just reverse it. It's like you get your money back.
It's an illegal play.
It's an
just
illegal
undo
play.
it. Okay.
Can't happen.
All right.
Like you can't do it.
Well, that's nice. That's
Which
reasonable.
I think is reasonable.
Yeah.
So across the board, new set, rules reference guide, balance of the force, new set announced, right? We're in regional season. That's kicking off. Regionals are doing really well. I saw Ohio had like a 50, 60 person regional. There was another regional
Sizable.
north of here. I don't know. It's like, I don't remember what state it was. It was like 60, 70 players. So it seems like people are coming out. I mean, 50, 60 is about where it was last regional season, and I know this year's kind of been tough on Destiny. It had a big delay between sets 4 and 5.
It really did.
It had no talk about it from FFG at all between sets 5 and 6, and then we had these balance issues happening. And so a lot of people were concerned that, like,
What's going
this
on?
was really going to affect the outcome. So,
Yeah.
and it still very much could. I think there are repercussions from those actions that are happening, but it seems like there's a momentum building again in the community.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or at least the contrast between the nothing and now the something is much better.
Yeah, I mean, you have, and they did a really cool article, FFG, with Jeremy, the designer, where he built the deck and he was showcasing this and talking about different concepts and design stuff, and it was really good. And so hopefully we are kind of entering a very new era. They also have the Galactic Qualifiers, which it's like special events at like conventions they do.
Sure.
The first one of those happened, and it had really good attendance, and they had cool new prizes, and they had updated how they worked since earlier in the year when they were running them.
All right, cool.
And it was like a lot of really positive feedback. So long story short, I hope I'm trying to get better at it. Could have started with this. It seems like after a lot of missteps that a lot of good things are happening. And the real question is what's going to happen to the minimum of the game at this point. Which leads us to the conversation.
To the meat and potatoes.
Which is, can Destiny beat Magic? Now, kind of like we did an episode a few weeks ago on building communities, and before we dove into, we got a ton of comments on Twitter and Facebook in response to this. Basically, we posted like, "Hey, can Destiny beat Magic's our topic? What do you think?" We have a ton of responses, which is awesome. Thank you all for leaving that. We're going to get to a lot of those, but before we do, kind of framing the conversation, so that you can understand our perspective. And if you're newer to tabletop gaming, by newer I mean last 5 years. You have a better frame of reference in terms of what we're talking about, because Magic the Gathering came out in '93, and so if you started playing games in 2014, there's a large chunk of time that you're kind of missing out on.
Totally.
And I think it's worth breaking down. So the real first thing for me, I just want to kind of hit is why we're even asking the question, right? Which is important, because I think every game that's released by a publisher aspires to be successful. Like they want to be successful, and if you could be very successful, that more power to you. And I think anyone that plays a game wants their game to be successful, because that means you're going to have people to play with. But if you're newer to the space, if you've been around, I guess, for a bit, you'll understand that Magic's just a titan of the industry.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Disproportionately huge.
I remember we did another episode using the ICV2 numbers from 2017, which is questionable the more I dive into the numbers. But they're a good frame of reference.
From?
They're a good frame of reference. We went to Gamma, and we're going to go again this year, I think.
Oh, we decided. News.
Yeah. Well, did you see the KeyForge deck?
I did see that.
I got to go now. Anyways, so they're just... I don't know where they're getting their data, right? And I think it's more qualitative than quantitative, but it's quantitative data, so it gets weird, right?
Yeah.
But short version is the two most important, a handful of pieces of information that are most important, just for context. 10 years ago, the industry is doing $300-400 million a year in total revenue at retail and the hobby channel. This doesn't count Walmart and Target and mass market stuff, Barnes & Noble. And then 2017, which is 10 years in, it's at 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
So just as
immense growth.
Immense growth, right?
Yeah.
And half of that is in collectible card games. And the number one game on the collectible card game is Magic the Gathering. So essentially what that's saying is that half of tabletop revenue is collectible card games, and the biggest chunk of that is Magic. So when we're talking about Destiny, or really any game though, beating Magic is just an indicator of success in my opinion. And there's various metrics. You
Just
could use
a
revenue,
yardstick. Yeah.
you could use total number of players actively playing the game. But essentially Magic is the big person in the room, and anytime you have a new game. And so I think the other interesting part for me is a lot of people, and we've seen this, I've been playing games since I was very young in the 90s. And that's kind of a question that gets asked a lot. It's like, could this be the game that beats Magic, right? And it has, as we've seen now, no.
Yeah.
No, that has never been the case.
It doesn't happen.
But I think
It
a lot
hasn't
of people in a lot of games, the game we first started selling was the Spoils, and they were basically pitching themselves as a streamlined, modern version of
tuned
Magic.
up Magic, yeah.
And here's our better OP system. And they failed. Like they failed utterly. So, but the thing for me, right, is like we started Covenant essentially because we grew up playing games and we made our best friends playing games, and this was the thing we were very passionate about, and we very much value what games do to bring people together and create connections and whatnot. So I just lost my train of thought there. I started thinking back through our memories. Anyway, so we started Covenant. We grew up with it, and it was a very normal thing.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a very small town, and really didn't, when I was a kid, go to that many game stores. And it just felt like this really cool thing we were into that more people should be into. So our kind of, as a company, our perspective a lot of times is how will this grow the industry?
Yeah.
And so talking about the ICV2 numbers from 200 or 300 million to 1.5 billion, the industry is growing. And so when we're looking at games like Destiny, to me, the question is not how does a game come in and take Magic players, right? Which a lot of games try to do, or take players from any number of games.
Cannibalization is bad for everybody, ultimately.
Yeah, it just splits the community, right? So instead of...
Wait for it.
Yep. Instead of asking that, right, it's like, how can this actually go from 1.5 billion to 3 billion? How do we go get more people involved that aren't involved? And I think that's where Destiny has some unique angles.
Yep.
And even KeyForge now, I think that'll be part of this conversation. But so instead of stealing, right, in my mind, if a game is actually going to beat Magic, and by beat I mean more revenue or more players, and usually those are connected, right?
Sure.
It's going to have to bring in more people. So that's one of the elements, right?
How do you do that?
But how do you do that? But that leads us to this question, right? Which is, can Destiny beat Magic? And I think the truth is, any game could technically beat Magic.
Infinite time and space, all things become possible.
Like, there's nothing that is just guaranteeing Magic stays where it's at.
Correct,
And any game could.
Yes.
But the real question is
it likely? Probably.
Why isn't Destiny beating Magic?
Sure.
And how could Destiny or any game actually beat Magic? What is the path forward that would allow that to happen?
Yeah.
And I think not allow it to happen in terms of like some vindictive, I want Wizards to go out of business, so like I need Magic to fail kind of way, but in a way that literally grows the community. And I think we don't have numbers, right? We don't know how many people are playing these games. The only thing we do have as a kind of frame of reference is these revenue dollars, which I hate equating people to money.
Yes.
So caveat there. But if you picture each dollar as a person, right, and you have 200 or 300 million people to 1.5 billion people, that's significant growth. So again, instead of taking however many millions of people are playing Magic and putting them into the game, how can a game actually come along and up that number?
Correct.
How can we get to 3 billion or 5 billion and get more people involved in this community? And that's where I think this is coming from, which I think is just important to lay down.
Yeah, and it's all about, like, as we said, not cannibalizing and truly just growing the amount of people who are participating. And that's, I think, probably to take our first swipe at how could or can anything ever beat Magic, is to understand that it's already an existential challenge for any other game that isn't Magic, because Magic already exists. You've got this not only huge game that has dominated the industry, but also the people who are playing it are invested in it.
Sure.
So
very entrenched, right?
But all that to say is that the reason that cannibalization is even something worth talking about is that it's always going to be easier to get somebody to essentially jump ship brands, game, etc., than it is to bring somebody completely new outside of the tent and pull them into it. Like I can recall any of the times when I was first getting into Magic in middle school, and it's like, hey, there's this great thing that I'm totally into. I'm going to show you how to play. I already have a deck built. I'm going to give you the better one, and I'm going to pull my punches, etc., and get them into play. But at the end of the day, 8 out of 10 of them are just kind of like, okay, that was neat. But not really interested.
But like you've seen the Magic,
correct?
Right? Like
I've seen the Magic, but if you can find somebody who's already playing, I don't know, Pokemon or name any other game.
Here's this new exciting thing.
Correct. It's like, well, I already have a base of familiarization. I can use that as a springboard into this new, but similar experience.
You already have people you play with. You already have places you play at, kind of a thing. So throwing a new thing into that makes it a lot easier.
So we're literally having to go up against something that is, just the elephant in the room, the 300-pound, 800-pound gorilla, however much weight it is, and try to make not just conversions, but actual introductions to not only a game, but an entire industry and template of entertainment.
Well, and taking players from that community isn't growing the tabletop community.
No.
That's the negative side effect of it, right? Cannibalization is actually hurtful.
Sure.
To a point. Because what'll happen, and I think on the community building podcast we got to this a lot more, but it's this idea that if you have a group of people playing this game and then you splinter them off into 2 groups and they splinter off into groups, it's eventually you don't have enough people playing any game to regularly have people playing these games.
Just fragmentation.
So before we really dive into analyzing how could, I think that's maybe the better way of framing the question, how could Destiny beat Magic from this point forward? I want to give a little bit of a history, go back in time a little bit, back in the 90s.
Sure.
Because I think for people that are newer to this space, to tabletop gaming, it's really easy to think that how things are now is how things have always been, which is just not true, right? It's the industry and this tabletop gaming in general now is significantly different than it was. And
though some things are still the same.
Some things are the same. Old habits die hard.
That's true.
So for that though, I actually never really got into Magic.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and just let that cat out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag.
But I know you played Magic, right? That was your kind of interest. So can you just weave me a tale?
Yeah, sure.
How'd you get into Magic?
It was essentially brought to school one day by one of my Pizzos, and it was, the newest thing I had ever seen, and it was just completely cool and awesome, and couldn't help but get into it. And then, long story short, it became a springboard into my first visits to an LGS and yada, yada, yada. But suffice it to say that there was just nothing else like it, and it was captivating. But at the same time, there were still, alluding to some things that haven't changed, a lot of the same kind of growing pain issues existed in the earliest days of Magic as existed not only for Destiny, but more or less for any other collectible, particularly game that has ever come out since, which is just that there is an immense amount of supply shortage. And then there's also...
That was a huge problem for Magic up front, right?
A huge problem. I mean, it was just impossible to find. And whenever I remember recalling that whenever you could get anything in and it was available to buy in a store, even if it wasn't what you were hunting for, like the right set or whatnot, you would buy it anyway, just because, well, it's something and I'm hungry for more. But also coupled with that supply shortage issue was there was also a huge information shortage, which also seemed to be something out of the Destiny playbook of when's the next stuff coming? What should I expect from it?
It was the early 90s, right?
There wasn't even the internet.
So there wasn't the internet.
You had trade magazines.
There wasn't social media.
And rumor.
Well, and rumor. Lots of rumor, right?
Yeah.
Local stores who are on the phone with the distributor, who is on the phone with the publisher.
Yep.
And very different time.
Yeah, and Magic was essentially, outside of a few really old school miniatures games, it was the first kid on the block that wasn't Dungeons and Dragons or 40K or one of your old, very niche board games or whatever the non-niche mass market board games were, like Monopoly, Risk, etc.
Sure.
So it was very much a horse of a different color. And so as a result, everybody's industry-based approach to it seemed as confused and bewildering as any new game that seems to show up these days. It's
Sure.
like, tell me about that KeyForge Unique game. What does that exactly mean? How does that relate to me? Collectible what again? I'm supposed to play with these cards?
Yeah. And, I think talking about supply issues, communication issues, even the lack of organized play at all, that wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
But, one of the advantages Magic had is that there weren't 15 other games you could play.
Sure.
At that. So right now, you go 3 months without talking about Destiny, and in that period, they released the second edition of X-Wing and KeyForge, right? And then on the flip side, everywhere else in the market, 40K's rebounding, Magic's got stuff going on all the time.
Sure.
You've got the Warhammer Champions, which is a new game. The Transformers TCG came out.
That's right.
And you go down the list, and it's like you have all these options.
Yeah. Take your pick,
so
frankly.
There's a lot of terms in terms of the market condition change, but also I think, if you could, I'd be curious what your experience was like, because I started playing Pokemon. That was my first card game.
Yeah.
And so I learned about Magic because we're from the small town in Chelsea, Oklahoma, and my mom would bring me and my little brother up to Tulsa with our Pokemon decks, and we would go to the one of the stores here, and we'd be playing, and then at some point it would be like, hey, we have a Magic event. You guys are going to have to cough off the table. So we would hop on the floor as just okay.
Which is still my favorite place to play a card game, honestly.
On the floor? Yeah. That's true. I have lots of pictures of you either building a deck or playing a game. But yeah, playing on the floor, that was normal when you're 10 or 8 or whatever. But that was how I got introduced to Magic.
Sure.
So for a long time, I had this very negative perspective on Magic.
Yeah.
Where it's well, why, I was always second rate because of Magic.
100%.
And the Magic players made it feel like that.
Oh, yeah.
And they were not, at least where I was, trying to incorporate. Where it's hey, yeah, you're playing Pokemon, but do you want to try this thing?
Sure.
And so it just was always that thing. And so it was really easy for me at the time to not, and I was a kid, so obviously, to not understand the real impact it was having.
Totally, yeah.
Or why it was the case. And I think I understand that better now than ever.
Yeah.
But your perspective, what was a game store like in 93, 94 when you first walked in? What was your experience there?
It's a little kind of a broken record at this point because it seems like something that is being talked about all but every other episode. But for a large part, it was every other game store that you've been to, even today, where there's more or less everything under the sun. Granted, they were in very specific and less diverse compartments or categories of games. There was D&D, the board games of 2 different kinds, and then your miniatures games, but was mainly just whatever Games Workshop was putting out. But all that to say, it was a mishmash of a lot of stuff. It was very unrefined and unpolished. So you more or less had to, get there when there was seating available and play space. You had to then figure out what was available to either participate in or to buy, and then you just had to try your best to either find somebody who was into what you were into and or get into an event that might have been up and running, because outside of calling up a store, speaking to somebody who was competent about what was going on, because at this point there was no Friday Night Magic.
Yep. There's not tournaments.
Correct. Yeah, you were essentially just rolling the dice every time you were going to the store, but that was what you had to do, and sometimes you got lucky, but other times you showed up, you made a transaction or two, sorted out your cards, tried to see if anybody wanted to trade something, and then you were done and you went home.
Man, I remember trades being such a big deal.
It was immense, and it was even more haphazard in the earliest of days, when you didn't have the magazines that would at least give you a metric of value that
just
you could
rare or rare.
Correct. So it's I want to trade you this card or that card, and then it was on top of that the subjective determination of how good a card might actually be.
Well, and when you're in the 8th grade,
that was
understand how good a card is.
That was all
difficult.
over the place. So anyway, chaos around it.
Well, and we had a like I said, small town. So I ran events out of the back of my uncle's movie rental shop. And so we had a tight-knit meta of somewhere between 6 and 20 people, depending on the game and what's going on. But every trade was like, it's kind of like a trade in the NFL now, where like me trading cards to Steven made both of our decks better.
Yeah.
And it's almost like an arms race, right? Where it's like
this.
now everyone else in our group is like, oh man, how are we going to beat this? And now they're making trades to basically keep on pace, right?
Sure.
Versus now it's just a lot different. You can buy singles, you can buy saga sets, right? You can just skip the whole thing. But I think, the thing for me so I started playing Pokemon TCG. I don't remember what year it was, but I imagine 96-ish. And by the time I got there, Magic had been out a couple years, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the most profound ways it changed the industry had already started happening. And I think a lot of people, I am certain we will get into this as we go, but a lot of people confuse the cause of Magic's success with the results of Magic's success.
Totally.
And what I mean by that is that the thing that pushed Magic or shot Magic to the moon is not the thing that is happening now, right? And so as I started diving into this, I actually started writing a blog like a year and a half ago about this topic.
Yeah.
And I never finished it because I got like most of the way through my first draft and it was going to take way too much time to actually finish because it became way bigger. It started off as a small little like, I'll write this thing.
Sure.
And it just exploded. Because as I started looking back, what I started realizing, kind of just understanding, is that before Magic came out, right, the tabletop games that were around, D&D, 40K, board games like Monopoly and Sorry and Clue and that kind of stuff, Scrabble.
Don't forget Pax Britannica.
Yes.
But I mean, that's
Exactly.
the kinds of games that were out there. A lot of those kinds of games.
So you have those kind of games, right? And even the stores I was going into, it was like, they remind me a lot more of like a vintage stock today.
You're correct.
Which is like you have movies and DVDs and CDs and vinyl and collectibles and video games.
They got that orange or green price sticker on.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
They've
with
been
like a 9.99.
in-house re-shrink wrapped.
And so like, you buy games, or you go to the mall and they have the stores that have like the toy stores and they have the section of TCG stuff and you buy your packs or your box or whatever. And so like, they maybe had a table or two. Yeah. But it wasn't built to play, right?
Correct, yeah.
And there weren't tournaments and there wasn't organized play and there wasn't, it was very different, right?
Yeah.
And so like, I think when Magic came out, the reason, besides, I mean, obviously it's the first collectible game. So baseball cards were popular, right? Games are something people have played forever, right? And so the idea that you have a collectible game that you're playing is a big deal.
Sure.
It's a huge innovation in the space.
Yeah.
But then the game itself, compared to any other game of its time, was also incredible, right? Richard Garfield did a standout job. It's a very unique experience for the first time, right? And like the colors and the color pie and the characters and the art.
It was classic. It was an instantaneous classic.
Yeah, it's just immediately like, okay, this is great. But the thing that really happened as I started looking back, though, is you realize that what Magic really did was they totally transformed the economic model of the industry. If you think about it, right, it's like there's a reason collectible card games are half. Yeah. There's 750 million of the 1.5 billion. And the truth of it is that they're just a huge economic engine, right? They cost a lot of money. If you want to get a bunch of it, mainly they make you want to keep buying stuff.
Yeah, right? It perpetuates your transactional habit. Yeah.
And so, but what that allows, it's kind of like a domino effect, right? Which is like, once you go from people, like even 40K back in the 90s, is like maybe spend $100 or $200 a year. Sure. And all of a sudden, you have people spending thousands of dollars a year. Yeah. And so what that means, though, is that where a store might be selling comics and collectibles and baseball cards next to it, all of a sudden, for the first time ever, tabletop games are an actual serious part of your business. Yeah. And so the entire evolution of the industry starts, right? Like it starts becoming what we're seeing today. Yeah. And so much of the industry was shaped by Magic for that reason, right? Which is like, I would be really, I wish I could know this stat. The number of stores that were exclusively game stores prior to Magic. Yeah. Compared to the number of game stores
mixed hybrid
that are
types.
now at least 90% games, right? Because, and how, like, I think that is all driven by Magic. And so that is, when you start understanding just that the success, in my opinion, came from that. Because once that happens, right? Like if you're a store and you're buying a board game and you buy 10 copies and you sell it and
Yeah.
you make however much. But then all of a sudden you get this Magic game and you can't stock enough of it. Every day you have customers coming in.
There's this one guy who is equivalent buying a board game a week.
Yeah,
more
it's
or less.
crazy.
Yeah.
And every day you have new customers walking in saying, hey, do you have any of those Magic packs?
Yeah.
Calling you, do you have any of those Magic packs? And then all of a sudden it's like,
Sends message to the game producers that, hey, if we make more things like
we
this.
can,
Yeah.
but also like just if you naturally think about it, right? You go to that store, hope you get a seat.
Yep.
Well, the store sees their little 10 chairs full with 15 people that could have played.
100%.
So guess what the store does? Let's get some more tables in here, right?
Yep.
And so
Bring 'em in.
slowly but surely Magic starts competing and winning over comic books and collectibles. And naturally, here we go. The rest is history. So with that in mind, I think now is when we can actually start answering the question.
Sure.
Right? Which is, in my opinion, it's obvious that Destiny is currently not beating Magic.
Yeah. Duh.
So, yeah, it's Magic is Magic, right? And I don't know that people truly appreciate the scale of it.
Sure. But it's immense. It's probably like 50 times or something greater, if not, if more.
I don't know the number.
Yeah,
but
it's
I know
huge.
it's big.
Yeah.
Because there's 3, 4, or 5 somewhere in there 1,000 game stores in the U.S. Game stores,
Yeah.
right? Specifically game stores, and I would venture to say 99.9% of those have Friday Night Magic, have Magic events, sell Magic product on the regular, etc. And I don't. Destiny's nowhere near.
Correct.
Like, I mean, we're talking hundreds, maybe 1,000, 1,500 stores. When it was really hot and popping it when
Yeah.
it first came out, maybe all of them were trying to buy it, which is part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so it's not doing it. So first question for me is, going back to Magic for a second, what do you think is holding Magic back from expanding the tabletop industry even further? Like, what's preventing it from growing?
Honestly, I would say its own conventions. That Magic has more or less been what it is. And granted, there's progressions, new keywords and all these mechanics that they'll creep in, and of course,
But Magic is still
specific
Magic.
items. Yeah, Magic is Magic. So it's sort of like it's already been there and done that all but to itself kind of a thing, and certainly for its player base. So not only do you have that factor, but then of course there's the turnover issue that every game suffers from. So it's not like it's going to be any like that there's ever going to be a single game where they're going to have complete retention and then all their growth is going to come from people who are outside the gaming industry tent, so to speak. So it's just that, it hasn't necessarily broken its mold, and I think for very good reasons, that if they were to upend the cart and say, okay, this whole mana thing that we've been basing our game off of for decades now, it's gone, and now we have this other thing. We're stealing KeyForge's Amber system or something like that, and we're just going to go to town. It's like, that would be immensely disenfranchising. Wizards of the Coast, they're no dummies about the asset that they have in front of them. So there's a baked-in interest into being traditional and or conservative with how they approach things. So it's just like, well, after 25 years, even though the industry as a whole, that balloon is growing, it's still a probably proportionate growth thing, that it will remain half the pie until
much of the pie
until
further
Kingdom
notice.
Come, and then that kind of a thing. But it's just like you have to look to these other games now to be the innovators and bring something fresh and new that may well cannibalize Magic players, but hopefully will bring somebody in because they have their own personal laundry list, perhaps, of reasons why they never got into Magic.
Yeah, well, and I think, 25 years on, it's 25, right?
Yeah.
25 this year. If Magic is going to pull in new people, it's probably pulled them in already.
Yeah.
Like it's captured that, right? And so I think, when I'm looking at it, that's why Destiny was such an exciting proposition, or part of why it was an exciting proposition. It was fresh, it was new. It's based on the Star Wars IP, right, which is huge.
I hear you like it.
I do like it, yeah. Which is huge. It's a very innovative system,
Yeah.
right? Smaller deck sizes, you only need 2 of each card. It's more cost effective. It looks more modern. I mean, Magic has a classic old 90s card game look to it. And the art's been modernized, but it still feels like an old game.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the appeal. But
For sure.
you have a new IP, and it's also published by one of the biggest publishers in the space, right? I mean, Wizards is owned by Hasbro, and they're big.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like Asmodee owns FFG, who makes this game, and like they're pretty big. So, you know, what I'm looking at, it's like you have a great game using a very popular IP published by a industry leader, and if that game can't achieve this, what can?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's hard to say what or whether, but also the fact that, you know, it is an apples to oranges comparison in terms of the paradigms that were in play when Magic was introduced into the world versus what it is now. There was no real competition in that class for Magic to compete against, so that if for the first few years you wanted to play a card game, it was Magic or bust. But now, as we already talked about, it's like, oh man, it is a cornucopia of options available to me, and I can take my pick at my pleasure, kind of a thing, and that is huge. It's necessary in terms of, you know, where the evolution of all but any industry has to go. It's like, yeah, originally if you wanted a car, it was Ford, but now it's all open.
I really like that analogy, because if you think about, I think of Magic in terms of like the Model T, right, or the Altair computer, or go down the list of major inventions / innovations that kind of changed the course of history, right? And that's what Magic did. Right? But even the Model T eventually, like look at Ford now, right? They're not even I mean, they're still a huge player.
They're hardly making cars anymore.
But yeah, I mean, it's a very different situation. So that's where, like, I think the inevitability is that something will be Magic. Like, I have no doubt that at some point, like, it can't go on forever. And if it does, it'll be the first thing that's done that probably ever. Maybe there's
But also, you know, being mindful that even like with a very hot game now that is KeyForge, that big things have small beginnings. And that if you think that you're going to supplant the biggest thing that ever was in the gaming industry, even in a year's time or 3 or 5 years' time, I think is, you know, wishful thinking.
But I think and I should be more familiar with it if I was going to use this analogy, but here we are.
All right, let's do it.
If you use the car analogy, right, it's like Ford didn't lose because, and they haven't lost yet.
No, but they've definitely changed gears.
Yeah, and
car analogy.
And I think the thing I'm trying to kind of get to is like, if you look at these things, right? You look at, I even think of Apple, right? iPhone came out. I think iPhone was a game changer. If you think about phones prior to iPhone, you think about iPhone.
I wanted that Razor.
Yeah, right. The Razor was the thing. I remember within a year before the iPhone came out, how bad I wanted a Razor, and then overnight, it's like
Razor what?
Well, no, forget it. But they changed the game, right? The full screen, apps, touch, the whole way that works, and now Samsung and Google are doing a fantastic job of beating them at their own game.
Arguably better, yeah.
But because Apple changed the paradigm, and then other people come in and figure out how to do it more efficient. So that's where, like, when I'm thinking about Magic, right? It's like I get a sense that they were the iPhone. Right? They created the format. And so, in my opinion, you know, if a game is going to come along and be Magic Destiny or otherwise, it's got to basically just completely innovate on something else entirely. So maybe you change, and I think there is something that came along that is beating the pants off Magic. Already, it exists. It's right in front of us, right? Which is, I want to say it right, Hearthstone?
Hearthstone, yes.
Yes.
Not Hearth.
In my head, I was like, oh, I got a Hearth. Hearthstone, which is, we were looking at numbers just the other day.
It's amazing. I was flabbergasted when I looked them up.
And the reality is that, like, it's beating in total number of players. It's beating in total revenue. Now, the caveat here is it's not a physical tabletop game.
Correct.
And it's not a game that can be ported to tabletop. So it's not tabletop
per se.
Yeah. In the same way that, like, you know, a self-driving car might not be something you compare to a Model T.
Sure, yeah.
But it is.
They're related.
It's a game, right? It's a game. It's a collectible game that people are paying money to play, a lot of money, right? So more players, more money. And I think
like 5 times the player base for Hearthstone than Magic.
5, right?
And which is.
And so I think part of that is when we're talking about how are you going to go get people involved in this that have never been involved, right? I think. Hearthstone. Hearth like Darth. I'll never forget it. Hearthstone is a great example to me, which is like it is incredibly easier to get into Hearthstone than it is Magic. Like some of the negatives of Magic, right, is the theme, which is like if you're not into that theme, you're not going to be
correct.
Probably not into it. is the entrenched community, right? Like getting in right now is, even as a longtime tabletop gamer, that is a crazily like heavy task to try to. How do I get in?
Sure.
Like, I mean, good.
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
It's a challenge.
And the financial cost of it, right? The barrier of entries, etc. Hearthstone. Jeez, I'm gonna comedy of words here. Hearthstone is it revolutionized other parts of the space, right?
100%.
It's okay. Yeah, you play with the cards and it's a game and it's collectible. Magic solved that.
Yep.
Economic model, and then they said, what if we don't print the cards? And what if you can download it on your phone? And what if you can play for free technically if you want?
Checkmate.
And what can we do in a card game that you can't do online?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like.
A lot.
Here we are.
Yeah.
And so I think the same thing applies, though, for a physical game, right? It's kind of what I'm getting back around to, which is if a game wants to come and uproot Magic, it's going to have to ask the question, right? Magic reinvented the economic model.
Sure.
And collectible is a model, and there's other models, right?
Yeah.
Besides collectible card games. So you could invent a new thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard. Inventing is way harder than innovation.
100%.
So the next question is, well, if you're not going to invent anything, which could happen, and maybe KeyForge unique games are that thing. Maybe that's a twist on the paradigm.
For sure.
You're playing a card game, you don't have collecting, you don't have deck building, every deck is unique. And there's a lot of things I'm excited to see them explore with that new paradigm. But in the same paradigm, right, it's like, well, what else are you going to reinvent about this format that is going to be so revolutionary that you can upend it?
Yeah, it'll be out with the old and with the new.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be something. I don't know. I don't have the answer. If I did, well, that's what we'll be working on.
Not telling you guys.
But I might. Ideas are crap, right? I don't put a lot of
You're an ideas
stock
guy?
in ideas. I think delivering on it is much harder.
Yeah,
Anyways,
for sure.
I remember someone posting that like they had the idea for Magic 5 years before Magic, and it's like, okay, but you didn't do it, and you didn't put your money on the line and do it and figure it out and risk it.
Things like that always remind me of one of my favorite lines in Ghostbusters, where they're getting kicked out of Columbia University, and they are like, "Oh, what are we going to do next?" And they propose the idea of going to work in the private sector, and then one of them says, "Oh no, I've worked in the private sector before. They expect results."
That's amazing.
So
You've used that quote before. That's really good. But basically asking the question like, because you may well capture a bunch of the Magic players, or Yu-Gi-Oh, or Pokemon, or whatever. And those are two long-standing successful collectible card games, right?
For sure.
But I do think it's more than likely that you're going to find a way to take this functioning economic model, right, that's been kind of solved, and bring twice as many people to it from outside of it, right? And that's why, again, coming not to hit the same drum here on KeyForge.
It's significant, yeah.
That's why I think KeyForge is so important, is that it is solving what I think are some of the most fundamental issues with collectible card games, right?
Card games in general.
Card games in general.
Yeah.
Better way of putting that. Because barrier of entry is incredibly low.
Yeah.
It's basically zero.
Yeah.
And I think by the nature of the game, it becomes less about, and this is my kind of segue into the Destiny bit, and then we'll actually finally get to what people said.
Sure.
Because you can't customize it, it inherently becomes about discovery and not optimization.
Yeah, and it takes a burden off of you from the other way of looking at it.
No organizing cards or deck building or knowing what a meta is or means, and like when the game becomes exploring your deck, right? That is a very different than like we all have the same cards and we're trying to optimize for the same variables.
Yes.
And I think hearing Richard this year speak at Gen Con, Richard Garfield, the designer of both, right, which is fascinating,
right?
And Star Wars TCG, one of my favorites, and Netrunner.
I didn't know
also
you did Star Wars TCG.
Yep, the dice one that Steven and I used to play. So it's literally Magic.
You're just
Netrunner,
island hopping
Star
from
Wars,
Richard Garfield
KeyForge.
Enterprise.
He's hard to get away from.
Yeah. I've tried to keep stalking me.
But the I totally lost it.
Oh no, not this again.
What's going on? I just got so
relieving barriers of entry.
yada yada.
No.
But
you're right. It does.
It sure does. Well, no, I think basically when hear Richard talk, Richard got on Richard.
There you go.
Hear Richard talk at Gen Con. And like essentially when they designed Magic, the idea that someone would own it all, or own specific pieces that they wanted,
never intended,
wasn't even a thought,
or desired even.
I mean, obviously, if you know human nature, this is the natural outcome.
Hello, hoarders.
If this is successful, this is what's going to happen. But it was the idea, like, and I dream of a day where this is like with Destiny. Here's coming back to it. How can Destiny beat Magic?
Zesty now.
Yes, it can. But if it's going to beat Magic, it has to completely change everything it's doing. And I think this will run through all these answers that we're about to do on these questions, or these responding to these people.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it has to get away from that entirely.
Sure.
That optimization, own everything, that vibe.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how you do this, right? It's not built to do it now, but the idea of a new set coming out, and I have my like starter that I buy, right? And then it's like every week I get 3 more packs.
Yeah.
And then I get 3 more packs till the next set comes out. And then new set comes out.
Who has this much control though?
No one.
Yeah, to
but
ration out their own KeyForge decks now.
The thing is, like, if there was a way for me to play like that,
for sure.
I think I would enjoy that significantly more than having a big pool of cards, doing all the deck building, optimizing. Because what happens, right? We look at the Destiny tournament recently. It's like 7 at the big event. 7 of 8 decks are Throne Snoke.
Sure.
So you go to a tournament, it's like, there were a lot of decks that weren't Throne Snoke at the tournament, but those are the ones that won,
they didn't
right?
get to the top.
So all day long, you're playing, you run to Throne Snoke, you lose, you play your other game, and I would bet that 90% of the games that aren't against Throne Snoke in that tournament, the people playing them are probably having more fun.
Yeah.
And I can't vouch for that, but that's just what I'm willing to bet on.
Sure.
And so then we've been over the past
they don't
year.
like winning.
Yeah. Well, when they're playing not against Throne Snoke.
Exactly, yeah.
So that, like, if we both lost to Throne Snoke and we got paired, I think we would have more fun than either of the games where we played against Throne Snoke.
Yeah.
And it's because it's missing that discovery element.
I agree.
Right? And that's when we were kids, right? Every pack was magical.
Yeah.
Every new opponent. I mean, I remember playing people and I had never seen cards where I was playing against them.
Yeah.
And it's like they play a new card and it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
And that's all gone.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think what's replaced it is just, it's like, it's just less satisfying.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like a game that could crack that code, and KeyForge may well have done it.
We'll see. But I was talking to Steven earlier, and I was thinking that one of the things that could be a paradigm shift is having something like KeyForge that brings all that it does to the table that is new and fresh, but adding one extra little thing on top of it to be that, I don't know, missing thing that could be the catalyst for even more broad cultural changes and approaches to the game, is to make it cooperative. And that's essentially that, even with like you and Steven frequently playing on the live stream, is that even though your approach is consistently and inherently casual, nothing's on the line, nothing's at stake, etc.
Well, it's just having a good time.
But it is nonetheless inescapably competitive. It is a head-to-head matchup, and you can't get away from the fact that every match will have one winner and one loser, barring weird draw conditions. So if you could have a game that is inherently geared around discovery of something new and fresh with each and every permutation thereof, as well as being something that you could share as a team-based thing against whatever it happened to be. So like, a Star Wars, Destiny with Star Wars, and somehow you are always going to be like either on the Rebel or Imperial side.
And you have a mission and you're trying to
that kind of a thing. It's like, ooh, don't get me started. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what, like, I don't know how it happens, but like there are paradigms that aren't, and I think that's what you look at.
Or combinations thereof.
When you look at cars, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that analogy. Or even phones.
Yeah.
This is maybe a better example. So we'll go to the iPhone. I'm more familiar than cars. I'm, as a lifelong Apple bleeder, true believer. Anyways,
for sure.
Yeah, bleeder. Rough on the hands. But the reality of the iPhone came out, changes the paradigm. And then to me, Google and Samsung, there's a reason I keep buying from Apple, which is I think they are really good at taking ideas and basically making them as efficient as possible.
Sure.
Right? Toyota does this excellently. They took the assembly line process, they did their whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Quality assurance, et cetera, and they're great at just pumping out cars that are super high quality.
True.
Right? But when you're talking about cars, right? Like a very common example is like, self-driving cars. Whoever cracks that code, and really cracks it, that is the kind of shift I'm talking about in tabletop, where I feel like with a lot of games, they're aiming to be more efficient, more interesting. Here's our spin, here's our take. But that kind of change, the how you play it, maybe you're playing card games like this cooperatively, and I think Arkham Horror did a great job of this.
Oh, yeah.
Which is they built deck building into the game. They made it a cooperative thing, right?
Yeah.
The LCG is another one of those kind of like shifts or whatever, and KeyForge is doing it. So like you have all these elements, and it's like there are those paradigms that have to bend. And I do think at some point one of them will hit.
Yes.
And it will hit harder and bigger than Magic. But a lot of variables have to be in line to make that happen.
It's all but like, the stars align kind of a thing for the right elements to be in play at the right ratios at the right time and place for it all to just coalesce into something that will check the boxes for it's revolutionary, it's approachable, it's all these things.
Yeah, and I have a lot of ideas, and I think we'll probably get to them. I'm going to speed through some of these comments. About how even now, 2 years on, because again, like you're saying, any game that thinks it can beat Magic in 2 to 5 years is mistaken. It's a 10, 15-year process.
Yep.
So even now, Destiny, right? Momentum happening. I talked about it at the first of the show. Good things are being done. They're figuring things out. It's a big publisher. It's a Star Wars license. It has every reason to keep existing and keep learning and keep growing.
Yeah.
And I think that Star Wars is inherently more approachable and interesting for the mass of people not playing tabletop games than Magic, as an example. I think you would have an easier time getting someone into a Star Wars card game than Magic.
I would agree.
Anyways.
Ceteris paribus.
But, gosh, I'm losing my brain today.
Did you have coffee this morning?
Yes, but I just keep getting so into it that I forget where I'm even going. But Destiny, even now, I think could change paths.
Sure.
In a way that it could become bigger than Magic. And so with that in mind, I want to answer or respond to some of these questions because I think they will enlighten how we think that path could be. That is, I think, different than a lot of people would expect.
Yes.
And we'll get to that. So I'm going to start here.
At the beginning or at the end?
No. I'm just going to go with probably the most heated one. So Sam of Downtime Gaming says, Magic just announced a new $10 million pro league, so ... Nope, can't beat it. And then he says, not that money's everything, but having a professionally set up league with ongoing prize support will keep more players in the game than an amateur game like Destiny.
He's not wrong.
I definitely don't think a $10 million league hurts.
Yeah.
But I also am pretty convinced that the $10 million league is not a reason for success. It's a result of the success.
Oh, entirely.
And so what I mean by that is a lot of people associate success of a game with tournament attendance.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is true at all.
Well, especially these days, because even people who work with Magic will tell you that over the last decade particularly, there's been a tremendous shift from competitive to casual scene, and that the majority of their player base are now otherwise casual types.
Sure. And I think that really gets to the root of why we're playing these games in the first place.
Yeah.
And at some point it went from, and it's natural evolution, right? The game comes out, everyone's excited about it, you start playing it as a kid. And it's just this really obsessive, fun thing you do.
Yeah.
Right? This is way more engaging, entertaining, and you're face-to-face with people, and it's way more rewarding and stuff. New sets are coming out, it's exciting.
Yeah.
And then eventually, you do that long enough, and all of a sudden it's like a new set comes out, what are the best cards, what's the most value, how do I optimize my decks, how do I win a tournament? And it's easy to lose sight of why you started in the first place. And so the reason I say that is that Destiny could have a $500 million tournament circuit. And
howdy.
I don't think it actually beats Magic. I don't think that one thing would do it.
Oh, yeah, you're probably right. But it would definitely spike.
People would play it.
It would spike tremendously.
But I'll tell you what would happen is that the people that are playing for the $500 million would run a lot of the current players out of town.
Oh, sure.
I probably...
Well, it would be like when Wonka said he put a golden ticket in his chocolate bars. I mean, people went nuts.
Yes, they did. They sure did. So, anyways, I think that's a bit like...
I was just trying to enjoy a chocolate bar.
Right. But then you got a golden ticket. So
Veruca over here is an opening case of
I want it now.
Yeah.
But and then I immediately flashed to the Wonka episode of The Office, and it's just my brain's gone. So I guess the main thing I would want to point out there is that I think it's really a lot of people. The answer is OP.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong.
Yeah. No, it's too much pressure on OP, and the expectation isn't there. Magic was big long before there was OP.
That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like Magic didn't even get big with OP. So
Yeah.
the idea that like just because Magic's doing it doesn't mean that's what made it successful.
And again, there were reasons why Magic got big before there was OP, but to think that OP is necessary, I think is just wrong or an oversimplification.
Yeah. All right. Jeff Rodriguez here says, I think that Destiny definitely can. Star Wars is a beloved universe and gives Destiny an edge over other games. Will it happen in the next 2 to 5 years? Unlikely, but with better tournaments for casuals and competitive players alike, I think it can for sure. The audience is there. So I think this is kind of another thing we've been harping on a little bit lately, which is he mentions casuals and competitive players, but like I think that the trick here is focusing on the enjoyment of the game over the competition.
100%. Yeah, even tournament, and not to get semantical, but tournament is all but like, something that most casuals are just like, oh no, how many times have we heard that from anybody playing any game? Well, I didn't want to come to the tournament to learn how to play because people are going to be
I had
XYZ.
The real life Destiny brunch thing I hosted.
That's right.
Which is like, there were 3 or 4 people that were like, yeah, like I don't come to the weekend tournaments, but like this sounded fun.
Yeah.
Like you were just hanging out playing and building decks and talking and stuff. So
Yeah, it would be all like you need to call it a get together or Destiny meetup or something to all but literally dethorn all of the strings or conventions that might be attached to anything that underscores that you will have to compete against your fellow players.
You think about it, and it's really easy when you start doing this. If you start thinking about it from the perspective of someone who hasn't done tabletop games or events or tournaments, and the reality is that tabletop games, like I said, it's like at a certain point the people that are interested in what's happening now are in.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the world exists.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are far more people that would hang out and play a cool Darth Vader versus a Luke deck instead of going to a tournament. Way more people that would do that in the universe than people that want a 9-hour grueling, I needed to practice for 2 months to get ready for this tournament event for Destiny.
Yeah.
And so assuming that barrier of entry is one of the big problems with a game like Magic or like with Destiny.
Or even a 4 to 5 hour. I mean, that's a long time.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't have that time, right, to spend or anyways. All right, next comment here from Hunter Shelburne. Hey, Hunter. No, and that's okay. Magic is an 800-pound gorilla that many card games before Destiny have tried to conquer and has only gotten bigger. Even WOTC, WotC, Wizards of the Coast, the maker of Magic, is struggling with that, with what Magic is now because the casual audience is where the money comes from, but the pros are the ones making noise and complaining. Destiny doesn't have the same challenges and is still a young game that is doing well. I just hope FFG can make the improvements as time goes on to OP and other stuff to keep the game going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the interesting parts of even Magic. I mean, there was a lot of people complaining lately about organized play, and then they announced their $10 million circuit recently.
Here it is.
But I think it's a common known thing that the casual players of Magic are the ones that are actually spending money on the game.
And every game at this point. Every game studio will tell you. We hear it from FFG and all the time.
I think that's why people will say, this many people, I even said it at Top Show, this many people show up to a regional. And I think it is an indicator of health, but I don't think it is
the indicator.
Direct, right? Because it's like I said, 200 or 300 people for Destiny played in Worlds last year.
Yeah.
And there's way more players than that.
Oh, for sure.
Way more.
Yeah.
And I think that's what... that's all I got on that.
Yeah, it's an indicator. It's not the indicator, and there is no the indicator. Really.
Well, there is the indicator, which is how many people are
units
playing,
made and sold,
and how many units are sold, right? But those are all foggy. You don't get those. The publisher has some of those, but even the game makers have no idea how many people are playing their game because all they see is units sold. And distribution buys those.
They don't know that it's Larry who's buying half of them.
Yeah, and then distribution is selling this to retailers. And how many retailers have 5 boxes on the shelf?
For sure.
And if there's 2,000 of those, there's just 10,000 boxes that the publisher thought they sold.
But aren't actually getting to a user.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the next set comes out and they don't order as much and so on and so forth. Okay, next for your Ed Wang says, FFG seems spread thin with the number of games they're supporting, and that number seems to get bigger every year. As a result, they can't accurately predict release dates, and games, including Destiny, have been known to go through long periods with no new content. So if by beat you mean number of players or sales volume, no, I don't see Destiny ever passing Magic. And I think this hints at another problem that we haven't addressed. And it's tough. I mean, I think this is It's the one thing I wish that everyone got right, that I understand there's a reason that very few people are, especially companies that haven't been doing it with their game for 25 years. But the short version is like, Destiny had problems up front, right? Not enough product.
Biggins.
But there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Which is if you overprint a product, you're going to kill a game.
And Magic had it. Champions had it. I mean, there is so much to lose, and that is to say everything. If you overextend yourself at the launch of something and you compromise your capacity as a company that all but literally requires profit to stay afloat, to ever perpetuate that thing that you even started.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it should be understood. Everybody should be patient with a company when it's new and they don't have any idea how big the thing they're going to make is going to be.
Now, the reality of that, though, is I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I also think that communication has been poor.
Correct. Yeah, they have to go hand in hand.
Because that's where, like, it's being short printed or being short of stock because it exploded.
PlayFusion's been knocking communication out of the park.
That's right.
Yeah.
They frequently post, but even with Destiny, right? We had between set 5 and 6, they released set 5. 2 weeks later, they announced set 6, and then we go almost 3 months with nothing.
Radio silence.
And so that is killer because it makes players the rumor mill, right? I heard people talking about they don't care about the game.
Yeah.
That this game is dead.
Yeah.
This is blah. But
we'll fill this void.
The
with
thing
something.
to me is that, like, even right now, right, regardless of it says they're spread thin, they can't predict whatever.
They've been doing that for a while though.
But and I agree, they are spread thin. They're making too many games, right? And you look at Wizards, owned by Hasbro, a giant company, 2 games.
Yeah.
D&D and Magic right now.
Pretty much.
Right, and they put out Transformers.
Yeah.
So 3 games. Asmodee, which is smaller,
Focused.
not funded by Hasbro, is who knows how many games.
Dozens.
All the board games,
Yeah.
tons of card games, etc. And so I agree with that, but I also think it's very simple, right? I think there's simple solutions to this.
But even with like D&D, there's how many SKUs associated with that game? And they have to manage development, production, distribution,
marketing,
all of them. So it's not necessarily about independent titles because Wizards has a lot of SKUs to manage and a lot of products that they're developing and releasing on very predictable and uniform schedules all the time. It's really just about competency, efficacy in real time, these kinds of things that allows some people to be strident in their success and others to falter along the way.
Yeah, and short of that, right, I think there's easy versions of this where it's like the fact that, going into the next cycle, it's like, is there a reason we don't know the name of the next 3 sets? Is there a reason there's not?
Because like Lucasfilm told them no.
But can't you just like get that approved? I don't know. Maybe there's a Lucasfilm's a problem.
Yeah,
like,
Lucasfilm is a problem.
Having a licensor, that's the negative of Star Wars. But the reality of, like, if we just knew there were 3 sets coming out here, say set 7, 8, 9.
Sure.
And the target is Q1 for set 7, late Q2 for set whatever, and then Q3, Q4 for the other set.
Sure.
And then it's like, if that needs to change, you post an update. It's like, hey, we missed.
Or just to say it's always going to be March, July, November.
That'd be great.
Every year.
That's it, or at least that's the target.
Sure.
Even if you can't
but
say.
But a month is a big target.
I know. Even if you can't say this is the exact date is coming
True.
up. You being able to say we are aiming for July.
Yeah.
And then if it comes to June and it's like, oh, you know what? There were some issues. We actually had to push it back to August.
Yeah.
We'll keep you posted. And that's what I mean by, like, communication, which is just the something on my face. Communication is the thing. Where it's really hard, I think, to understand because you're printing in another country and you're shipping into a dock and there's customs and who knows what goes on there and development and licensing and all these things. I get it. It's hard.
Yeah.
But, like, understanding when that stuff's going to happen as a player and as a retailer is incredibly beneficial. And then the other thing is, like, I don't get how you have 3 months of no communication about the next set when
it's bad.
Straight up bad. And there's licensing approval and I'm sure there's stuff going on. But the short version is, like, with 160 cards in a set, if you're not posting once a week to social media, here's a card for the next set.
Something. It exists.
Here's a card for the next set, right? That's enough. It's very simple. So I do think there's some fundamental things like that they could get right, but there are some macro level strategies I think they could change for Destiny for the better.
For sure.
All right. Josh Kester says, when watching Magic, you see so many different decks, even at the top tables. Every year seems one deck becomes the thing and everyone plays. For Destiny, do you think they can achieve diversity? I have 2 answers to this. One, I think it's more diverse than you're letting on. When I've played in these events, there's a lot of different decks representing the top 4, top 8. There are some regionals that have been, like Thrawn Snoke is dominated by this, or Pomaz phase.
Sure.
But the balance of the force has been used to basically curb that.
Yeah.
But the second thing is, I just don't think it matters.
Diversity in player
I don't think
entrance.
Tournament diversity.
Yeah.
It matters in terms of like people being able to see top decks and mimic them and play them.
Sure.
But again, I think the perspective shift I want them to have is stop caring about.
And meta is an acronym, isn't it? Like most efficient tactics available or something like that.
I had no idea that was an acronym.
I believe it is. I'm not even sure. I could be wrong. Correct me, internet.
Maybe someone turned it into an acronym.
Maybe they did. It was a retrospective. But suffice to say that the origins of that meta, that definition of meta being true or not, the sentiment is nonetheless accurate. If people are coming to a tournament, no matter how casual you might like it to be, they are looking to win at some level, or that winning is otherwise unavoidable. So outside of there being like some altruistic reason to be playing the game and striving for your best, then it should be a given that there are only so many permutations available for what the most efficient thing is, the most winning thing.
There can only be so much variety at that level.
Correct.
But I think that's where, to me, it's like I would much rather them care about how fun are the new cards to play.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Or are they playing new cards, which sadly was a failing of the most recent Champion set, is that unless you're Chaos,
you're playing all the first set cards.
Correct.
Yeah. And so I think that's where, like, I would love to see tournaments and not tournaments alike focus instead of, again, if you switch the player focus from what's the most efficient, powerful deck to something else.
Yeah.
And that's the big paradigm shift I would love to see. And I think they could take that Magic's reinforcing the competitive thing, right?
Sure.
I read a big article the other day about over the past 10 years switching from competitive to casual and how many players that brought in for Magic.
Yeah.
And then they announced a $10 million circuit like the same
seems
day.
a little counterintuitive.
So the reason I say that, though, is like, I think one of the ways a game could attack, whether it's cooperative or casual, as we've said, I hate labeling it like that, but like really quadrupling down on finding a way to make playing the game super fun, and that's how people play it, not find the most efficient thing.
Sure.
Because there's always going to be competitive tournament players, and they're always going to be posting articles and doing videos. Doing thing. I think having tournaments is great, and I think having those players be happy and have an enjoyable game is great. But the more and more I'm playing and interacting with people is realizing most people aren't those people.
Oh, yeah.
That's a tiny
a sliver.
fraction. So then when all the conversation about how to grow this thing is focused on them, it's just, it makes me feel like we're asking the wrong question.
It puts the shoe on the wrong foot.
It's kind of like the Henry Ford quote, and then back to the cards, cars somehow. Cars, cards, that's pretty funny, actually. This is a good
one
analogy.
letter.
He always is quoted saying, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about tournaments and organized play, where it's like, how do we grow this thing? And it's like, a faster horse. It's like, we need to build stronger horses somehow.
Yeah.
And it's like,
not quite.
if you had a more powerful horse, that would be great.
Yeah.
But like, I get a sense that there's a car waiting to be invented, and Destiny could pivot to it. Maybe KeyForge is it. I don't know.
Which again is why my Hearthstone has it made, is that because it's on a digital medium, your community is literally just a tap away, as well as your gaming, and as well as your maintenance of that game. If they need to errata anything, uniform across the board. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Okay, so I'm going to end with this. This is the last thing, and we'll discuss it, and then we'll get out of here. Adam Latorno says, interesting, I guess my question in regards to the topic is a two-parter. What constitutes beating Magic, which we've already kind of outlaid? He says, is it outselling them? Is it achieving a larger player base? Or is it something more intangible, subjective? And I think it's both.
Yeah.
Right?
Some hybrid of that.
Some hybrid. And then number two was, should the goal for Destiny not be to beat Magic, but instead to achieve the same level of sustainability as Magic? Magic's been around for 25 years and has shown no real signs of ending. We've seen so many great collectible games go the way of the Dodo? Long before their time due to the lack of a player base, poor company support, rest in peace Decipher, that is a sad story, etc. At this point, merely surviving for as long as Magic has should be considered a huge victory and definitely an attainable goal for a game with mechanics, fun factor, and IP of Star Wars Destiny.
That's a great perspective.
That's cool, right?
Yeah, sustainability.
I think that is another element of this.
But I don't think that there is a company that for a second is thinking at their onset about sustainability.
Yeah, it's not about you can't.
They
you
are
can't
all
think
about
the
growth.
next 25
Yeah,
years in those terms.
And that may be part of why you fail. You have to, but it's not exactly what you need for still being around.
Well, and you know,
long-term
a
period.
risk of I'll mention a couple things here. The risk of that with Destiny is that it's Star Wars based.
Yeah.
So it's a license
Mm-hmm.
with a licensor who could pull that license from you at any moment. So there's a risk to thinking 25-year term on a game like this. I don't think you can.
No.
Whereas Magic, you can.
Yeah.
They own the IP, they own the game, they can do whatever they want. But that is what makes the KeyForge so interesting.
Yeah.
Is that 25 years from now,
It's their own baby.
not only is it
Yeah.
theirs, but the reality that you don't need rotation, the barrier of entry is still $10.
Yep.
Right? And this is the kind of innovative
some slight
shift.
inflation.
And obviously, I didn't know about KeyForge when I was first writing the blog, but the reality is that KeyForge is actually doing some things that makes me think this thing could be around.
Yes.
And even as of recent, I mean, I did this week. I got my decks, right, when I first started playing. I sorted them by the houses I wanted to play, and inside that I sorted them by the cards I most wanted to play. And I had these like 10 decks that I really wanted to play. And I always knew when I got my subscription for the displays that I was going to give a certain amount of my decks away. But the game's out, right? And there's people in the store that
Yeah.
I knew
And
wanted to play.
do you want people to play
Yeah,
with?
and I have Eric Wainwright, a really good friend who plays Destiny, and his brother was visiting in town, and his brother was really interested in KeyForge, and his brother doesn't have time for something like Destiny. So Eric was like, hey, do you guys have any decks? And I was like, no. Why? And he told me, and so I gave him a couple decks.
Look at you, the sweetheart.
But no, that's not the point. The point is...
well, I'm convinced.
Thank you. The point is that in 5 years,
Yeah.
if I buy 12 decks of every set, I've got a stack of 200 decks.
Sure.
Right? And it's not the same thing where like you have a Black Lotus for Magic.
Yeah.
It's like worth thousands of dollars or whatever.
Thousands of dollars.
But like, you know, I will have decks that I'm okay partying with.
Yeah.
And so then I have a friend who's interested. And it's like, I can just hand them decks, right? And I think, again, it's the long-term impact of a game like that, I think, is unrealized yet.
They have done the best job right out of the box at resolving the barrier to entry quandary than any other game I've ever seen.
It's pretty impressive.
And not only solving it in an approach standpoint, because the game is decidedly easy to learn, but from an economic standpoint, it can cost you $10, and whatever things you have lying around that can substitute as tokens, you're ready to play.
You're literally ready to play.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I'm very excited because, you know, looking back 10 years ago, 2008, right? So this is back when we're still playing Monster Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Like, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
I feel like the industry has, and so my first Gen Con was 2007. So that was 11 years ago. And then advanced to this past year, 2018. It's a whole different ballgame, right?
Yeah.
Tremendous growth. Feels so much more approachable, so much fresher, so much more modern. The board game revolution happened in the 2000s as well. So it's just kind of this whole thing.
100%.
And I'm just can't help but feel like that it's on a path where the next 10 years is going to be even faster in the changes. So I'm excited to see it. I think KeyForge is a cool step in that direction.
Yeah.
But I think the question, unless you have one you also want to ask the listeners, we always ask questions at the end of the show. You can answer in the comments on YouTube. We really love seeing those and interacting with those. So please do this, because I actually really care about this question, unlike the other weeks. Just kidding. But the question is, if you were in charge of Star Wars Destiny, what would you do moving forward from now in order to, at some point in the future, grow Destiny past Magic in terms of players and total revenue generated from the game?
Sure, yeah. Let's hear those ideas.
Thank you so much for listening or watching. We really appreciate it. Until next time, keep playing.